All right, morning, guys. How are you? Everybody good? Good. All right. Well, the first thing we've got to get out of the way here is the reason why we do podcasts is because you see this right here. Everybody's looking at that and they're like, "Why is that S on there?" Okay. Well, that's why we do podcasts, because we're bad at this stuff, or at least one of us is bad at this stuff. Bobby's actually finishing up his. I'm going to brag on him here just for a second. He's actually finishing up his doctorate in organizational leadership. Not a lot of people know this because he never brags on himself, but he's actually going to finish the program the fastest ever in that college. So congratulations, Bobby. That's awesome.
No pressure. Now I have to actually do it. Thank you, Chad. Yeah, it's going to be a secret, but
that's part of it. Well, guys, thanks for having us this morning. Hey, listen, our story is probably a very similar to your all story, just in what you do. I actually I own a State Farm agency within Independence over on 42nd and Phelps. And I serve as the worship pastor, I guess, for a church that Bobby's a pastor at. And I'll let him tell a little bit about himself.
Yeah, so Independence is kind of home for me. Was born in Independence, back at Independence Regional years ago, but came back to start a church in 2009, Epic Church. And currently, a couple years ago, we moved over by Target off at 291 and 39th Street. So when people don't know where that's at, I just say we're next to the funeral home Speaks, and everybody knows where Speaks is at. So, but we also, the church owns the Epic Sports Lodge, which is over off of kind of just south of 40. We used to have a building next to that. So, yeah, Chad and I, between small business and just business and church, which church is a small business in a lot of ways, right? 90% of what we do is pretty similar to 90% of what everybody else does. And so yeah, it's kind of it's always fun to be with other business people and leaders. And the chamber's been great. I get to come to some of the events, and sometimes I have my Blue Springs school board hat on at those events. But Independence hosts 3 of our schools, and so it's always fun to get out and meet with some of you guys. So yeah. Thanks for having us.
He mentioned the sports lodge, so I'm going to do a plug here real quick. Who likes pickleball? Anybody like pickleball? Okay, well, so starting in March, we're actually starting renovations on part of the sports lodge. We're actually going to install 9 pickleball courts. On
8 indoor and 4 outdoor.
8 indoor, 4 outdoor. So be a pretty good deal, right? So if you like pickleball, come check us out. The whole podcast thing, exactly what is a podcast and how did we even get started? Well, we got started with this. It was kind of just on a weird situation. So long story short, we acquired some equipment from another church. And when we acquired the equipment from another church, we found this box. And inside this box was this Rode podcast machine, right? I mean, a Rode podcast machine, and it had 4 mics in there. Well, what are we going to do with this?
Well, our first question was, this is a brand new church that started in Texas. And it didn't last long, which is unfortunate, but that happens just like sometimes with business. And so it lasted, a year and a half, and they kind of closed up shop. And so we helped them out of some financial debt. As a result, they gave us some of their stuff, most of which was not too useful, but it is what it is. And so we found this, and we're like, why would a church this early in the game, out of all the things you need podcasting equipment? That just seems like a non-luxury item. And we found out it was because, well, they started during COVID. And so they kind of pivoted like everyone else. I think we're all tired of that word now, but they pivoted, right? And so they pivoted and decided, okay, we can't meet in person, so we want to do some recording. And that's what they ended up doing. So we ended up the beneficiaries, I guess, of this equipment that most churches wouldn't choose to start with. And we had been going at that point for 13 years and didn't have it. So it kind of prompted us to say, well, how can we use it?
Yeah, and I think the most important thing, I think for us was, number one, what kind of content can we put out? Bobby and I, on occasion, and I say on occasion, we probably do this weekly, we would sit down and just talk. And when I say just talk, the topics range from everything, but a lot of what we talked about was leadership. Right? So we talked a lot about leadership and different books and those kind of things. And for some people, guys, that bores people to tears, right? But for us, we're driven to the fact that, we actually enjoyed talking about that stuff. And then we started to open that up a little bit. And well, how could we get other people involved in this? And in comes Epic Leadership Podcast. So, I guess the first thing is why podcast? Well, 62% of the people, 62% of Americans have actually listened to a podcast. I would say everybody in this room has actually listened to a podcast at some point or another. That has become probably one of the things that most people listen to on a daily basis. I know Bobby's wife, Vanessa, I mean, that's just her gig. I mean, that's what she listens to.
Yeah, that's her gig. Well, how many have listened to a podcast? Okay, let me ask you a second question. How many of you have watched a podcast, meaning YouTube? Okay, because when podcasts first came out, I'm sure we all realize this. I just remember I was pastoring a church back in Michigan that my wife and I had started, and it was just a way for us to record the message for people that weren't there on Sunday, and not do the old school tape ministry thing that we used to do where we recorded and ran them off. And so for us, it was just like, oh, wow, this is a cool thing. But it's evolved so much. And yeah, my wife listens to podcasts when she's doing stuff around the house, when she basically working out, like it's just become her thing. And so yeah, it's interesting because my wife's not the person who's going to sign up for a leadership conference. Mm-hmm. My wife, love her to death, but she's not a networker. She'd tell you that too. She's more personal and private, but it's her way to grow from parenting to leadership to anything. She's the one that's like telling me, hey, you should listen to this. She's yet to say that about ours, but we're working on it. So yeah, so basically everybody in the room, yes, you've got experience with podcasts. So 62% of Americans have used it, and it's one of those things that's almost growing in popularity, like it hasn't died off yet. I think some of that's like the Kelsey brothers, right? People like that, you're like, oh, they do a podcast. Like it's really evolved into you can hear and listen to just about anything now on podcasts and watch it even on YouTube. So
yeah. Well, and kind of selfishly for individuals, whether you're a business owner or whether you're even working for corporate America or whatever that looks like in your career, I think at some point you have to develop who you are as a person, your brand development, so to speak. This is a way that Bobby and I have been able to develop who we are as a person, our brand of what it is that when people see Bobby, who is he, right? When people see me, who am I? And the brand side of this thing is a pretty big thing because it allows you to distribute information to a lot of different people, and it allows you the opportunity to show who you are as a person. So I think the brand is pretty neat up there. As far as ease of use, so all you need is a cell phone to record a podcast, to be honest with you. I mean, that's really all you need. I think the biggest thing that people get caught up in sometimes is, I need all this equipment and I need all these things and I need somebody to mix this stuff down and make it sound perfect. When the reality of it is with the platforms that are out there now and the software that hosts these things, it does it all for you. So if you just had a phone, you could actually start a podcast, to be honest with you. So I would say don't get caught up in the backside of this thing as far as here's what I need to make sure I have before I start. I would say just start, and the reality of it is grow it from there. When we started ours, I think we started it and had 2 listeners, maybe the first month.
Your wife and my wife?
I think that's what it was. Or it may have been you and I, to be honest.
That's what it was.
May have been you and I.
That's what it really was, yeah.
So just, again, just start. If it's something that you want to try, something that you want to do, I would just say start because it's really easy to distribute information through these podcast versions. So Bobby touched on this a little bit. So we've been doing this now for 14 months. We just recorded our 14th episode yesterday.
Releases tomorrow.
Yep. We do 1 episode a month. Our episodes range on leadership topics. I mean, that's what we talk a lot about. But when you open the door to leadership topics, there's so many different things that you can talk about. So right now we're doing actually a series on purpose-driven life. Talk a little about it.
Yeah, we just, I don't know, Chad and I find things that we both are passionate about, and we script out just some bullet points. Because for us, it's more about a conversation than it is about very specific sermon type. This isn't a sermon, it's just conversation. But we've thought a lot about, in our lives, kind of the idea of a blueprint. Like, instead of chasing your potential, live out your purpose. Man, I'm 42 years old now, and I feel like I spent probably half my life chasing potential. And then I realized most of the potential is something that somebody else put on me anyway, or I put on myself based on other people's expectations, and realized I'll never catch that. Like, that's always in front of me. And I guess you could argue that's a good thing if it keeps you growing, but there maybe comes a point where you start to say, is it more about potential or is it more about like my purpose, my plan, what for me as a person of faith, what God has for me. But even for a person that doesn't have faith, I think most of us would agree, like, yeah, I'm uniquely designed. I've got unique gifts and skills and abilities and experiences. So we're kind of doing a 6-month series once a month, of course, and we're talking about, for us, what is part of that plan, that blueprint in a house. You don't build a house without a blueprint. If you do, I don't want to live there. So what are the pillars? We're calling them pillars. We've got 6 pillars. And so we hit passion last month, and we broke down what passion meant to us. And then we just recorded what we call kind of just our principles that we want to live by, and we'll hit each of these. And but going back to what he said, I think when you determine the audience, so distributing the podcast, you got to determine the audience. Here's what I found. Our goal wasn't necessarily to have a huge audience. We're just getting together and talking. I'm growing from it.
Sure.
And so our thought was, if I grow from our conversations, maybe there's one more person out there that grows from it. And if it's a pretty easy process to record, who knows if one person benefits. And so I think the same could be true for you, whether it's leadership, or we've talked about, wow, what a cool thing to record some about our church life, like behind the scenes. So we started another podcast with another staff member. It's much more lighthearted. Somehow we ended up talking about, like, I don't know, guns and strip clubs in the last one. So yeah, I don't know. But there was a purpose for all of that. You'll just have to listen if you're really bored. But we called it Epic Life. And for us, it was about peeking behind the scenes of Epic Church and just talking about real life. And so we hired a new guy. So we talked about his process. And so again, the intent in that was totally different. Now it wasn't about leadership. It was for the people that attend our church to hear about events coming up. And maybe just to get, like I said, a peek behind the curtain. Our Sunday podcast is just that. It's just the sermon, as you can imagine, that goes out. So all 3 audiences are different, and all 3 podcasts are unique. And so I guess maybe the thing I think is, if you're a business and there's information that can be helpful to others, even about your business, why not? So we're even talking about in our podcast, like maybe we get our kids pastor to do something just on things that she's seeing with kids that parents can listen to, right? Maybe it's 5 parents that listen, but it helps them. So anyway, as Chad said, just with the audience, if you've got people that are interested in your information, this is a really cool way to get it out that doesn't have to be complicated. Now, with that said, you can get more complicated.
Yeah.
And we have, I don't know if that's a good thing or not, we haven't decided yet, but now we got a studio, and
we took it YouTube Live.
Yeah, video cameras and all kinds of stuff.
Here's what we realized. We have a face for radio, not so much YouTube. So, you know what I mean? And I think Bobby makes a good point. The content that you can deliver. Okay, now, if I'm thinking about this as far as content, to be honest with you guys, nobody cares about what I do for a living as far as insurance goes, right? Who wants to talk about that? And really, how much content about that could I really share, right? Same thing probably for Bobby. I mean, Bobby could do a podcast on just religion and those kind of things, okay? But number one, he's going to get really bored with that at some point, right? If he's doing that every single month due to the fact that he does that every single Sunday and every single Saturday. But at the end of the day, I think if you have some content that you could share that you feel like would be useful to somebody else, then that's probably what I would do it on, to be honest with you. Chase with Zuka Roofing here, I mean, he's probably not going to be able to say, well, this is how you put a roof on. How many people are going to listen, right? Plus, you're going to give your competition all your secrets. Let's not do that, right? But think about content that you could put out there that would be useful to somebody else. And then I think you have to determine how often you want to do this. When Bobby and I started, we said we want to do this once a month. And to be honest, that's a good frequency for us, because I think more than that, we're going to get wore out with it, number one. And number two, I think probably our listeners would get a little wore out with it as well. Now, if you're the Kelsey brothers, you can release one every week and people just keep listening. But at some point, those guys are probably going to have to figure out what they're going to talk about.
Yeah. So, especially in the off season. So I think you bring up a good point. Hey, I want to give a quick shout out too. You mentioned the Sports Lodge earlier, and you mentioned pickleball coming in May. But one of the other things, I'm sorry I couldn't make it to the grand opening, but Studio 5 now has full virtual reality, and that's pretty exciting. It's at the Lodge. And so there's even, I think, opportunities like that to find partnerships. You mentioned you don't want to compete per se, like give your secrets, but Chad, I don't think I would enjoy I wouldn't do the podcast if it wasn't a conversation between us.
Yeah.
If you just told me to sit down. And so in the same way business works, the Sports Lodge being able to partner with virtual reality to make it a better place. I think with podcasts, I think the conversation becomes more interactive than just one person sitting down. So you can just do a download, but I enjoy the dialogue. I think that could be important as well.
Well, and I don't think everybody would be comfortable doing it this way, but to be honest with you, Bobby and I talk zero about our podcast prior to the day that we do it. We write probably 5 or 6 things on the board of points that we want to make sure we hit, and then we hit record and we go, right? Because it's more conversational that
And
way.
if you listen to it now, you'll be able to tell. You'll be
Exactly.
like, oh, that's why this doesn't make sense. But no, actually it creates conversation.
Yeah. What's even about today? I mean, we talked nothing about this presentation prior to this.
Yeah, I had nothing to do with any of the misspelled words. I just throw that out.
He threw the S up there, but that's other than that, that's all he did.
I'm kidding. This is all Chad's genius. But no, it makes it conversational. I think that's what's exciting about it is if I'm listening to a podcast and I really need specific information, that's one thing. But sometimes I just want to hear people talk and I want to learn from that conversation because I almost feel like it's a way to sit down. Well, my friend Mark Batterson, who writes books and is also a pastor, talks about every time someone's reading his book, he feels like it's a conversation he's able to have with the person that he couldn't have if you had to sit down one-on-one. Yeah. For me, podcasts take that to a new level because I feel like you're able to sit down and sort of engage in a conversation by listening that you wouldn't be able to do just with everybody all the time. And so, I don't know, it's got me fascinated more with other industries that I'm not even a part of.
Right.
Because I think so many of the principles are transferable that I can learn business stuff. Like I said, even as a church, 90% of what I do is similar to something that you do. Maybe 10% is really unique, but customer service, HR issues, getting the brand out there, the marketing, call it sales. I wouldn't necessarily call what I do sales, but sort of, right? I mean, I'm still trying to get a message out to help people. So even 90% of what we do, insurance and church, is so similar. So being able to learn from other people, that's another thing that it's opened my eyes to listen to different industries that I'm not necessarily a part of to say, how does that apply to my world?
Yeah, for sure. Kind of some of the technical aspects of it, and this is one of those things that you can get lost in. If you go on YouTube and say, "Hey, how do I start a podcast?" There's so much information out there you can get lost in it. But here's the nuts and bolts of it. Okay, you need to be able to record your podcast. So if you had a phone, if you had what we had was a Rodecaster Pro, which somebody's probably going to see that online for sale at some point because we no longer need it. Because now
true.
We've stepped it up in the world now.
Yeah, somebody with a really good deal on a Rodecaster, let us know.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different tools out there that you can get to record the stuff. Once you record it, then you just need a way to distribute it. And there are so many things. Anchor, Anchor, is owned by Spotify. It's actually a free service that you can hop on and you can upload your podcast to them. The only downside about them is they don't have a lot of the reporting features that a lot of times Bobby and I are looking for, as far as how many people are listening, where are they listening, what's the demographics, those kind of things. So we actually use a service called Podbean. It is a pay-for service that we have to pay for to upload it to that, but by paying for it, you get a lot of extra features and benefits there. But
what's the cost on that, Chad?
The cost on it is $160 a year, I believe. Okay. So it's really not bad as far as the cost goes. So, but Anchor, you can do that for free out there. And what this does is it distributes it to all the podcast platforms out there. So you upload it once, and you're like, okay, I want this to go to Apple. I want this to go to Spotify. I want this to go to Google Play. It sends it to all of these different places. So they make it pretty easy to do it. We recorded one yesterday. It's probably going to take 10 minutes to upload it. Since it's already recorded, we do a little bit of editing on the back end of it. That'll probably take 20 minutes. We upload it. It'll take 10 minutes, and we're done. So, other than recording it, which that one yesterday was 42 minutes long, but other than recording it, that's the work that we have to put into it. And we've even done things like, does anybody know Sansi Blackinger? Okay. Has anybody heard about her 50 by 50? Sansi was actually a guest on our podcast where she talked about 50 by 50. And it was awesome. I mean, we had a great time with her. We had some other guests, Dr. Bob Jerome, superintendent of Blue Springs Schools. He was on our podcast last year. Chris Levisay, council council person for Blue Springs, was on there.
We had Alicia on there.
Alicia. Anybody know Alicia Scott? All right, so Alicia was on there. So we've had some guests on there from time to time, but where we've found us to be the best at is when it's just Bobby and I just having a conversation. That's it. So I know that's a lot of information. I know some of you may have some questions, but
Well, let me go to the editing part because you take care of all the tech stuff. So we record an intro and an outro, right? And you just kind of splice that together.
That's it.
But when we're talking about editing, we don't go back and edit the content because that's
Correct.
kind of defeats the point of a conversation.
Right.
It's sort of meant to be a little raw, and I almost feel like if you get too caught up in trying to edit and produce, I don't know, I want to listen to stuff that's real. Does that make sense? I mean, you know, every once in a while it's so put together that you're like, okay, seriously, like it'd just be nice to hear something that I feel like I'm sitting down having a conversation. So the editing part is not really to make it perfect. I think you're just saying put a beginning and an end on there to wrap it up. And
Sometimes we have to edit out the pastor's stuff. He gets a little wild every once in a while. No, just
no,
joking.
it would be the opposite, but that's okay. So edit out Bobby's bad words, but I'm not cussing for Lent, so that's something I took on this year.
But again, I think that brings a perfect point to this, okay? And we'll tie a bow around it with this. There are sometimes stereotypes with the jobs that we have, right? So when you think about insurance, what I do for a living, people are like, man, that's kind of uptight, and who wants to talk to that guy? Well, this allows me to open the curtain and say, hey, here's who I am. Yes, this is what I do, but I'm also a father. I'm also a husband. I'm also a worship pastor. I'm also a friend. This is who I am as a person. It allows people to see that I'm real rather than just a name on a sign, right? Same thing for Bobby. When you think pastor, right, you might think, okay, well, this guy, he's going to judge me or something like that maybe. I don't know. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to see Bobby for who he is as a person. So,
yeah, I love Jesus and I cuss a little. So there we go.
There he goes. All right. What questions you guys have?
I would think that brevity would be valued.
Tell me more about that.
Well, one reason why I don't listen to podcasts is because it seems like I have for 45 minutes to an hour, and I'm not driving anywhere that far.
Yeah.
And I hardly ever sit down. So
Yeah.
I was wondering if you're doing 42 minutes to an hour, I assume. Whatever.
Some of them are actually a little bit less than that, but on average, I would say that most of them are 40 minutes, and there's a couple reasons behind that. Number one, when we sit down to do these, we don't put a time limit on them. We just don't. We let that thing go where it goes, and sometimes it goes quick, and sometimes it doesn't. I understand totally what you're saying. Here's what I would say, and here's probably what I would challenge just a little bit on. There's not many days that you walk by somebody that they don't have what in their ears? The AirPods, right? It's just kind of the deal, right? And it's just kind of what happens when my kids, okay, so my kids are 22, 20, 17, 16. 70% of the day, those things are in their ears. 70% of the day. What are they listening to? All right? I would challenge you. Go find if you've got kids, if you've got friends, go ask them what they're listening to. I will tell you what mine are listening to because I asked the question. I have one that listens to a podcast all the time. That's all he's listening to. I have another one that's typically on YouTube most of the time. Okay. I have one that breaks her finger with TikTok, which is kind of a crazy deal. And then I have another one that is on podcast a lot because she started a new job as a nurse, and she's learning how to navigate being a nurse through podcasts. That's what she's learning because as a new nurse, she started and she cried every day going to work because she was so scared to death. But what she found was a podcast that actually worked her through some of those emotions that she were having of other people who did the same job, right? So it's crazy out there, the amount of information that's out there. But no, I get your point. Really good question, though.
I think there is a place for that, though. If you're talking about a target audience, and you may say, like, where we do one a month, and it's maybe 45 minutes, 40 minutes on average, I think maybe the the target is, hey, I'm gonna do a weekly one that's 15 minutes. Maybe I only record it once a month, and I just do. And we could do that. We could break ours down into segments. And I think there's probably an audience for that, because I listen to them, and I'm kind of like you. I usually am not in my car longer than 15 or 20 minutes at one drive. But for me, I just typically resume the podcast if I like it, or basically if I give you 15 minutes and you haven't caught my attention, I'll just skip to the next episode or whatever. But I think that could be a creative niche of, years ago, I did something called 10-Minute Tuesdays. In 10 minutes or less, I tried to share kind of a devotional thought. It wasn't a podcast, but I could see something like that if it's a business kind of principle or something, or just, 10-Minute Tuesdays and 10 minutes and just 10 minutes or less. So yeah, I think there is some
And
value
I think
to that.
here's what's the unique thing about that. If he wanted to start that today, he actually could. I mean, he could go back to his office, spend 10 minutes, record it on a phone, go to Anchor, and have it uploaded by the end of the day. I mean, that's how quick this stuff can happen. So,
And the good news is social media, which we've not talked about, becomes
Absolutely.
such an easy platform then to get out the link to other people, right? If we were just relying on you have to search it in the Apple Podcast Store, I mean, we realize it's not going to get a lot of hits, and it might not even be the audience, especially if you're trying to do something more localized. But because of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all the social media, once it's on those platforms, how easy is it to share a link and say, hey, 10-Minute Tuesdays, 5-Minute Fridays, 70-minute Saturday? No, don't do that. Anyway, so
I think it would go without saying. I mean, have we generated business within my business or grown the church as a result of this podcast? And the answer is no. I mean, nobody's come up to me, well, I found you because of your podcast. I mean, that's just not what happened. Have we developed our brands better with this podcast, and are people actually coming up and saying, hey, I appreciate what you said there? And the answer is yes. I mean, we get when we release them, start getting text messages, hey, that was really good, appreciate it.
we know Matt listened to one, right? So we at least got Matt to listen to one. So there you go.
I
So
was inspired to start my own 50 by 50 list.
There you
there
go.
you
That's
go.
awesome.
There
See?
you go. Good job, Sansi.
You bet. What other questions, guys? Yeah.
You guys have joked on your podcast about Crumble Cookies sponsoring you.
Every single podcast we joke about that.
What does it really take to get sponsors and to actually make money on a podcast?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that it's going to take on the sponsorship side of things, I mean, to be honest, we could probably go get that if we wanted to. But the reality of it is that you go into a whole different level with that, for sure. There's a lot of podcasts out there. Does anybody know Ronnie Phillips? Ronnie Phillips is a good friend of mine. He's got the Papa Ron podcast, and he just started adding sponsorships to his. And I think it's great, but it just is a whole different level. You know what, to be honest with you, I got a full-time job already. I've got like 3 of them already. Bobby's got a lot of things going on, and it's just not something that we've ever wanted to. The Crumble Cookie thing, that's just because we frequented there a lot until Bobby stopped eating sugar in January, and I thought I could beat him, and we haven't had any since then.
It's a standing duel at this point, but we're just mad at Crumble. That's all it is. But no, it is a good question, Matt, because I think sponsorships is one of those things that there's a couple ways to look at it. I mean, you can think of, I'm going to go after people who are going to sponsor me because I have a certain number of people listening, or I'm going to be really creative, and maybe there's somebody who is local to Kansas City, doesn't want to do a podcast, doesn't feel like that's their niche, but we're not in competition with each other, and they're cool with, $100 a month, and I'm cool with throwing their name out because it's getting to a different, so there are some simple creative ways
Absolutely.
of not looking at sponsorship as, Nike sponsors me, at least that's what I tell people, but some local thing. I think that could be a good partnership. Maybe that's what somebody.
All we were
do.
looking for was a free box of cookies, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all we were looking for out of the deal.
It wasn't really a high bar, but
Pretty good return on it.
yeah. So,
But on the sponsorship side of things, I think the sponsorships are probably bigger with YouTube. I have a nephew who's 16 years old who has a YouTube channel that makes $600 a month because of his YouTube channel. You know what I mean? So I think it's bigger with that, but sponsorships are big in podcasts as well. So yeah, it's out there for sure.
we'll take sponsorships. if
Absolutely.
anybody wants to
We
throw
pass
one
the hat. We can pass the plate. Just do the deal.
Why would Crumble give you a box of cookies if they're already being mentioned every
out. That's true.
Exactly.
That's
Yep.
true. We
Yep.
did it totally backwards.
If
so-
anybody knows the local owner of the Crumble here in Independence, just have them connect with us. I mean, we've got a deal for them. It's a great package.
Yeah.
So
It's a great question, Matt.
thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Any other questions, guys? Anything else we can answer for you? Perfect. Well, guys, this has been fun as usual. It's always fun hanging out with Bobby just because we get to bounce things off of one another. This is how our podcasts go. If you guys want to check it out, it is out Epic Leadership Podcast on all of your podcasting platforms, so it's out there. We've also got our YouTube that's out there as well, and it's on actually our church's YouTube. So Epic Church KC is the YouTube for that.
I apologize. I didn't know if you guys were going to talk about more than the podcast, but just overall with your guys' schedules.
Yeah.
How do you determine your time management?
Man, that's an awesome question. I'm glad you brought it up because it's something that I think we're constantly working on. For Bobby and I'm going to speak for me, and then I'll allow him to speak for him but I think we're really similar in this. We are, and if you listen to our podcast, you'll hear a lot about the Enneagram. Has anybody ever taken the Enneagram? Okay, so you'll hear a lot about the Enneagram. You'll hear a lot about the Working Genius is a new one that we're working on now. Bobby and I are both Enneagram 3s, which basically means that we run really hard, and we're very competitive, and sometimes we can run too hard, to be honest with you. But time balancing, I think a lot of it has to do with we start early. Yesterday our podcast was recorded at, sometimes they're recorded at 7 in the morning, sometimes at 7:30, sometimes it's 8:30, but we start early. The other thing about that is we schedule that out. So we're always scheduled out about a week and a half to 2 weeks ahead of time when we know we're going to do it. As far as the balancing a time thing, man, that's something I'm still working on. I'm getting better at it. Where I need to get better at it is I need to get better with balancing time with family and those kind of things, because right now my time is eaten up with work, with different outside functions that I have. And sometimes you just have to make a list of what you're doing and figure out what's most important, to be honest with you. Bobby?
Yeah, it's a great question. At that question, I probably get asked more than any other question or something related to that. So I'll preface it with this. So pursuing PhD, raising a family, pastoring a church, overseeing a sports lodge, and serving on a school board amidst other things. I often ask myself the same question, like, how in the heck do you do that? Or why in the heck do you do that is probably the better question. But here's what I realized. For me, it's managing time is important, but more important than managing time is managing energy. And so that's one of the things where I've gotten better at getting sleep at night because, as Chad said, we start early, which is good. I like an early start to my day. But there's times where I've had to say, me on 4 hours, as much as I've told myself that I can run on 4 hours and I've convinced myself that I can run on 4 hours and I've done that since college, it doesn't mean it's healthy and it doesn't mean that I'm making the best decisions in the time that I have. So trying to learn to manage my energy better. And then the other thing is priority over balance. I used to feel like I could cut the pie equally. What I realized is that's an illusion. Balance is truly an illusion, but priority is not. So while my family gets less time than my job, which I think that's true if we're really being honest, like sleep and job and all that, I want to make sure that they're getting the best of me, not the rest of me.
Right.
And that's where that whole managing my energy. So even lately, I've been trying to carve out 20 minutes in the afternoon to take a nap. That goes against everything in me as an Enneagram 3. I feel totally unproductive. But what I found is even if I don't, which I rarely take a nap, but I sit down and I have some music or some background stuff on, no phone, nothing, that little jolt, even if I don't fall asleep, of trying to just shut my mind down. And I feel like once I pick my daughter up, I'm more engaged. So it goes back to that kind of managing energy. A lot of time management principles out there, a lot of good ones, but I don't hear a lot of people talk about energy management, and that's where I'm trying to improve myself. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but
I think one more thing to add to that is we have very supportive families. Our wives are saints. They are very supportive of everything that we do. But
they will go to heaven. We're questionable, but they made it. They made it for sure.
So I think it's having a good supportive group. And then, to be honest with you guys, Bobby and I don't do this stuff by ourselves. We have a team at our church. We have a wonderful team at our church that surrounds us and supports us. They do a lot of the recording for us. They help us out a lot with that stuff, so we don't have to worry about it. I have a team at my office that is phenomenal. and they allow me the opportunity to be who I am as a person because they take a lot of the stuff that, to be honest with you, has to be done, but it probably shouldn't be done by me. So I think surrounding yourself with a good team, having that balance, that energy balance, and then having a supportive family, I think that's the three things on this time management piece. And if you've got anything else that you can help Bobby and I with, we could probably still use some help, to be honest.
That's for sure. All right.
Good question.
Cool.
Anything else, guys? Guys, it was fun hanging out with you.
Yeah, thank you so
Thanks to the
much.
Chamber. Thank you, Mary, for the sponsorship this morning. That was awesome. Appreciate it.
Let's give him a big round of applause.